When I was a teenager in high school, I remember having a friend who said to me, I know what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be an attorney. And Martin, I remember almost puking in my mouth, thinking, why would you want to be an attorney? Because my perception of an attorney was somebody who helps people.
In 2016, Judge Marilyn Zayas became the first person of Latino heritage elected to a court of appeal in Ohio. Born in Spanish Harlem in New York City, she is now rated excellent, the highest rating any judge can get in the state of Ohio.
I never saw myself in the legal field. The main thing for me is I wanted to get to college and graduate college. And because I was good in math and science and I went to a very special high school, I'm actually an alum of a top 50 high school. And there's 24,000 in the United States public high schools. So because that's what I was trained to do, I was like, I'm going to be an engineer. So I saw myself like, I need to get to college, I need to graduate, and I'm going to be an engineer. My strength for me was my intelligence. School was not only a safe place for me, but it was a place that I was able to build my identity and to build my confidence, because I knew how to do school. You go to class, you seem really good, you write a lot of notes, you review your notes, you study, right? So I was like, okay, I knew how to do that. And because I was good at doing that, and I was better than most people at doing that, I always felt a very high level of confidence in the school environment and academically.
Welcome to today's show. In 2016, Judge Marilyn Zayas became the first person of Latino heritage elected to a court of appeal in Ohio. Born in Spanish Harlem in New York City, she is now rated excellent, the highest rating any judge can get in the state of Ohio, Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, and this was so in 2022. A former IT manager with Procter & Gamble, you have served as an attorney for over 20 years, which we should be talking about, and you were in the trenches with the poor, the rich, and small businesses. Judge Zayas, welcome to the Immigrant podcast. Tell us more.
Well, thank you, Martin. So happy to be here and sharing this moment with you and with your listeners. I feel very blessed to be doing what I'm doing because it's not only about being the first and only, it's also about just being given the opportunity to serve the community. One thing that I'm really, really proud of is my community, because I am an elected official. And it weren't for people who were willing to entrust this so important role to me and my team, who really kind of like backed me up with such passion, we wouldn't be having this conversation. To give you a little bit of context, while I'm an elected official, when I first ran in 2016, I had zero political background. I had been involved in zero politics. I had never been involved in a campaign. All of the campaigning lingo, I wasn't familiar with it. My team, I have such great love for the people that came out. Almost all of them had no political background as well. We used to call ourselves the blind leading the blind. And yet, we were able to bring something to the court that I think was really valuable. Because for me, there were so many challenges that I had growing up. I am a child that faced discrimination. I am a child that grew up in an impoverished neighborhood. I grew up in a neighborhood that was completely devastated by crime, completely devastated by drugs. My mother never even finished 8th grade. To this day, my mom does not have good command of English. And yet, we were able to bring to the court a voice of someone who understood that when we're talking about justice and fairness, what we're really talking about is making sure that the law is applied equally to everyone, that any preconceived notions, any biases, all of that is left at the door. And I think that's the beauty of our country, and that's why it attracts so many immigrants. Because when people think of like Lady Liberty, what they're really thinking about is opportunity for themselves and opportunity for their children. And that's what brings them to this country.
Very interesting. So what I found interesting researching you was that you made multiple career transitions, and I was just curious, how did being raised by an immigrant family in New York, go in a neighborhood where you say crime and drugs were really high, and facing discrimination, how did your family help you make the right decisions to get you to where you are today?
So just for clarity, so my parents were born in Puerto Rico. So when they were born, they were U.S. citizens, and then they migrated to Manhattan. So I always say, just like to keep it light, my parents migrated from the island of Puerto Rico to the island of Manhattan. Um,
Okay.
and when each one of them arrived, they had no command of English at all. So they, in Puerto Rico, everything is in Spanish. So I will tell you this, for both of my parents are highly intelligent. My mom particularly had such limited educational opportunities. Her mother had died when she was a toddler. And so she was raised from family member to family member. And because she was given so many responsibilities in the household, by the time she was in 8th grade, she had no other choice than to leave school because of all the responsibilities that she had. Even though she was a child, she had all of the responsibilities of the household at that time. For
Yeah.
both of them, because they felt that their paths were truncated, they really emphasized education for all of us. So, for example, and I remember this because I really did not like it as a child, but I understand it now. My father, particularly, he was passionate about math. I think in retrospect, he was very good at it, but he was very passionate about math. And starting in kindergarten, he would give us additional math problems outside of our allotted homework. And he did this all the way until, like when we got to algebra, then he kind of stopped at that point. But all through our primary education, we would have hours and hours and hours of additional math problems to do in addition to whatever we had in school. My parents were really good at taking us to museums. So growing up in New York, we had access to a lot of museums. My mom was excellent at figuring out when the free admission days were, and she would take us on the free admission days. We would go to the Bronx Zoo, which is just a world premiere zoo. She would find out when the free admissions days were for the Bronx Zoo, and we would go to the Bronx Zoo. So she would always find out anything that would give us exposure. Whether it was exposure and learning about anything or something that was more educational related, she would always figure out, even though we didn't have the economic means, she would figure out a way to get us there and to give us that. We were very active in our public library. Any program that was open, enrollment for parents to sign their children onto, my mom signed us up. And we were there at the public library engaging whatever it was, whether it was a reading program, whatever it was, we were engaged. Back then it was called summer school, but now it's what you would call a summer camp. It was like an enrichment opportunity during the summer. And the schools had funding to do this, and parents can enroll their children. Every year we were enrolled and we did summer school. So we actually didn't really get a true break from school because we were back in school in the summer, and we wanted to be back in school in the summer because it was a great opportunity. Not only was there learning, but there was field trips and there were people that would come and speak, and so they really my mom particularly, she pursued every opportunity for us. And I'll tell you this, Martin, because I didn't realize this. There's so much that you don't realize until you grow up, right? That you really realize,
Yes.
like, what our parents did for us. Like, we were so ungrateful because we really didn't understand. We were just kids being kids, and complaining and griping and not understanding what our parents were doing for us. When I was in primary school, my mom enrolled in the Parent Teachers Association. And she was active in the Parent Teachers Association through my whole education in elementary school. Remember, I told you my mom doesn't have good command of English.
Yes.
So one day I thought about that. I said, what was it like for my mom to go to these meetings that were all in English And she
Yes.
went to the meetings and actively went to the meetings and knew what was going on in the school. And I don't know how she articulated her voice, but somehow she did. Um, there was actually a sit-in that the PTA organized in my primary school that my mom engaged in. I mean, I don't know how she did it, but she innately knew that the only path for her kids was education. And she used to tell us all the way to adulthood, the only inheritance that I have for you is to ensure that you have an education. That's all I
Yes.
can leave you.
Yes, what a commitment. You listen to the story of how your mom worked hard to get your family and yourself educated is very interesting. But in the same process, as children, as you were going through that, did you find yourselves at times when you had to step in and help interpret or read a document for her so that she can be able to get to the next step?
That was a common theme, and it still is a common theme in my life,
Yeah.
where, especially after my parents separated, my mom would get mail, she would give it to me, I would read it, I would explain to her what it was. If she had any appointment of significance, I would accompany her to those appointments. I have three brothers, so I'm the only girl. Two are older than I am, and we were very sequential. My mom had three kids in 3 years, basically. And
Mhm.
and then almost 10 years later, she had my youngest brother. So by the time that I was a teenager, when it was time to enroll my brother into school, I would be the one that would go and enroll him in school. When he would get sick, I would be the one that would take him to the doctor for whatever was taking place. I remember going to a hospital one time that he was really, really sick, and my mom had to work because at that point my mom worked in a sewing factory. And
About how old were you at this time?
so I was, at the time, I was a teenager.
Okay.
Um, and so I took, so my mom said, like, you got to take him to the hospital. I have to go to work. I can't lose my job. And I went to the hospital. And when they realized that I wasn't his parent, they created a fiction on paper so that they can take care of my brother because I wasn't his legal guardian. I didn't have authority, but they needed to take care of him. And there was no, back then there was no mobile phones. So it wasn't like you
Yes.
could call my mother and get her permission over the telephone.
Yes.
And this is a common experience of immigrant children. A lot of time immigrant children become the adult in the household, and they're the
Mhm.
ones that are, kind of helping their parents and being the ad hoc interpreter for their parents and taking on those sorts of responsibilities.
Do you think immigrant children, when they are exposed to these kinds of experience very early in life, allow them to become better adults as they take on life of their own?
I think that they do. I think sometimes that it could be arduous for a child depending on how many responsibilities they have.
Mhm.
But those are really moments of compassion. It's about, you're
Right.
compassionate towards your parent, right? And I think it develops a sense of compassion. Um, for me, it wound up being something that changed the trajectory of my life. And let me explain, okay?
Okay.
So when I was a teenager in high school, I remember having a friend who said to me, I know what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be an attorney. And Martin, I remember almost puking in my mouth, vomiting in my mouth, thinking, why would you want to be an attorney? Because my perception of an attorney was somebody who helps people who are guilty get off. So I was
Okay.
like, why would you want to do that? But she was my closest friend, so I never said anything to her. For me, it was all internally taken. So I never
Yes.
saw myself in the legal field. And what happened is after my parents separated and my mom was going to court, and she was initially going to court for the divorce proceedings, but at some point she was going to court with regard to my youngest brother. And it was really to protect my youngest brother. So I would go with her, we would go together, and whatever needed to take place when it was time to get the next court hearing, I would go with her to the clerk's office and ask for the next hearing. I would go with her to her attorney's appointments, and I was her ad hoc interpreter. And when you go to, back then when you went to the domestic relations court in New York, it's called the family court, there's like a big waiting room. And there's all these chairs and you sit in those chairs. And you're watching the attorneys come in and, and engage with their clients. There was a moment that I went into the courtroom and I testified. So I got to engage with the judge who was ultimately making a decision with regard to my youngest brother. And Martin, I just remember sitting there thinking like, wow, it is the job of these people called attorneys to give a voice to their client. And it was really important because my mom didn't even have an English voice, right? It was really important for me, for my mom to have a voice, and for the judge to ultimately be able to understand why my mom is so zealously fighting to protect my brother. Because my mom was actually investing a substantial portion of her salary to pay an attorney to protect my brother, because she did not have a right to a court-appointed attorney. She was paying for it herself. And that was the moment that I realized I want to be one of those people one day. Now, I was really good at math and science, so I stayed, and I was, at that point, my major was electrical engineering, and then I switched to computer science. And I'm very grateful that I did that, because that's what brought me to Ohio, was being recruited by Procter & Gamble as an IT manager. And that, and one of my goals in life, honestly, was to be able to get away from New York City and get away from all of the circumstances that I grew up in, and to have a fresh start in a very different community. Kind of like why a lot of people come to America. They're looking for a new opportunity, a fresh start, a different environment, something that's very different from what they had experienced. And that's what I was looking for. And so I was able to get that by staying with the major that I was in and getting the degree that I had, and so on. And it wasn't until later in life, it wasn't after I was with Procter & Gamble for several years, after I was married, I was pregnant with my third kid. And then I took, there's something called an LSAT. And that's when I sat through the LSAT, and I went from maternity leave with my third kid to law school, entering University of Cincinnati Law School with 3 kids under the age of 4, which is crazy.
Wow. Well,
and that's
congratulations. I cannot imagine that. That sounds like a lot of work.
Martin, when I share that with young people, I always say this is not a do as I do moment. This is a do as I say moment. I don't recommend going to law school that way.
Yeah, I can see how that at some points can be overwhelming. There's a lot that you said there that I want us to impact, because I don't want to lose the momentum we have. You talked about your parents separating and eventually going through a divorce process, which you were part of because of interpreting documentation for your mom, and sometimes standing for her to be able to say what she needed to express. You also mentioned that your friend who wanted to become an attorney, you did not speak, but eventually you changed your mind and you were inspired to become an attorney. Over time, when did you learn to speak out your voice and not hold back what you're feeling? And how has that influenced how you see it at the appellate court?
That's sort of a work in progress. It really is a work in progress. So when I probably was somewhat self-expressed as a child, but also it really has taken me, it's been a path for me to sort of like learn how to stand up for myself, learn how to, look at adversity as a positive thing. So a lot of my life, I saw adversity as more of a negative thing. And I think a lot of us, when something happens, we go like, why is this happening to me, right?
Yes.
So I
Yes.
would, like, why is this happening to me? And then I would go into like, okay, what are you going to do about it? And I will tell you that I don't look at things as why is it happening to me anymore. I'm actually very grateful for the challenges that I have had in my life, because those challenges have culminated in who I am and who I am as a judge, and how I handle cases, and how I also, sort of like the respect that I have for everyone that comes to the court, no matter who they are. I think respect
Mm.
is a very important word. I think respect is something that, that humanity should give us. Now,
Yes.
sometimes we do things so that we relinquish that respect, okay? But we
Yeah.
all begin with respect, and it is through our own behavior that we're either going to build on that respect or going to relinquish that respect. Uh,
Yeah.
and so it's important to look at human beings that way, that we all come into life, we should all come into life with an equal amount of respect. We should all be born with an equal amount of respect, no matter where we come from, no matter what our family situation is, no matter, where we are. We all should start there. And then what we do with our lives and our own actions and how we treat other people, we're either going to be taking away, or we're going to be adding as to the respect that people give us, or that they
Yes.
that we have earned. So we, with our life and our actions, we earn respect. Uh, so, life, I think that it's really interesting because, as you get older, you kind of reflect and you say, God, I wish I was younger, these wrinkles, this gray hair, or whatever. But the wisdom that we gain through life is something
Right.
that we're never willing to give up, right? And
Yes.
um, and I'm at a point in my life right now that I think it's really important to reach to the next generation. I think that our current young people are growing up in a very difficult time. COVID has really taken a toll on the mental health of our
Hmm.
country, and the economy, hasn't been stable and has been very sort of unpredictable. The job market has been very difficult. So I think it's so important to really reach out to the next generation and provide, hope. Hope is a very powerful word because we use the word inspiration, but you can't inspire someone if they don't have hope. So I think you have to
Yes.
begin with hope, and then you build inspiration onto that. And then you want them to believe in themselves, and then you want them to take action, and you want them to become, you know? Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that I've done as a judge, because what really hit me really hard was I just never dreamt this big growing up. No one ever talked to me and said, Marilyn, you could be a judge one day. When I was in law school, never in any form or fashion saw the possibility of being a judge. Asking
What
me,
did you see yourself as in high school? I
like,
mean, we all go through high school and we get to a place when you're going through high school and you're like, okay, I think I want to graduate. I want to do this adult thing and this is the path I want to take, right? So what was that like for you?
the main thing for me is I wanted to get to college and graduate college. And because I was good in math and science and I went to a very special high school, I'm actually an alum of a top 50 high school, and there's 24,000 in the United States public high schools. I'm an alum
Right.
of a top 50 high school, which now would be called a STEM high school, but it was like a pre-engineering high school. So because
Mm.
that's what I was trained to do, I was like, I'm going to be an engineer. So I saw myself like, I need to get to college, I need to graduate, and I'm going to be an engineer.
I
Because
just want everybody that's listening to you to remember that this was driven by the fact that you wanted out of New York bad,
correct,
out of Harlem to be
correct,
specific. And,
correct.
and so while you're working toward that, you experienced crime in your neighborhood, you experienced discrimination in your neighborhood, and so the reason why I'm going back to this part is because a lot of immigrants that immigrate to most countries across the globe usually start from poor neighborhoods.
Correct.
And usually they start in low wage paying jobs, and because of that they find themselves working more hours than they are supposed to be working, and that creates a separation, not in just marriage but also separation for parents and children, right? And in that, some children end up raising their little ones, and in others parents get separated. You also touched on mental health, and which in across the globe, mental health has become an issue that constantly comes up on our show after COVID. Uh, if looking back, if you were in high school with the times we have today, where mental health is an issue, social media is a big issue. Immigrant parents are not at home because most of them are working two jobs to be able to sustain their family needs, especially now that inflation is so high. What path would, if you're speaking to teenage
Mhm.
immigrants and especially girls, what would you say to them so that they can start living their dream today?
I would say, like, look, really lean into your strengths and build your confidence off of that. My strength for me was my intelligence. School was not only a safe place for me, but it was a place that I was able to build my identity and to build my
Right.
confidence, because I knew how to do school. You go to class, you really really good, you write a lot of notes, you review your notes, you study, right? So
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I knew how to do that. And because I was good at doing that and I was better than most people at doing that, I I always felt um, a very high level of confidence in the school environment and academically, because that's a place that discrimination sort of dissipates. So either you got an A or you didn't get an A. You know what I mean? Like, you either earned
Yes.
that A or you didn't earn that A. Um, so I would say really lean into that and make that the source of your strength, where you're going to build your confidence, where you're going to build your identity. Because if you lean into that, nobody can take that away from you. Like, for me, if somebody
Mhm.
said, "Hey, Marilyn, you're dumb," it's like, "Oh, no, I'm not. Let me show you my report card." Like, nobody could have talked me out of that, because I knew I knew who I was. And I was fortunate that my parents valued that. So, when I brought home that report card, that was valued and expected that. There was a high expectation of performance when it came to academics. Um,
Mhm.
the other thing is that my parents, and back then we would call it running the streets, my parents never let any of us run the streets.
Right.
So, the expectation was you go to school, you come home, you study. Um, when my mom was working in the sewing factory, I would come home from high school. I would get dinner. I would go pick up my brother from the babysitter. I would get dinner started. She would come home. She would take over dinner. I would go study. She would let me know when dinner was ready. I'd come in, I'd eat. I'd go back and study. And one thing that my mom did, which was really excellent, is she really made it her job number one for all of us to be able to be students. And let me explain what that means, okay?
Right.
So,
Okay.
like my mom, for example, did all of our laundry. My mom cooked the meals. My mom cleaned the house. So she took care of all of the household things, so that our job was to study. And because I had a goal of getting out of my situation, and I remember moments growing up that there was something going on that was a big deal. And I'll share with you one of those moments. When the
Mhm.
Statue of Liberty was redone, and they had like
Yes.
the big thing, and they had all these fireworks and all these boats came into New York. I was in college. And I remember coming back from the university, and the train is crossing the bridge, and I'm taking a peek to see if, like, are the fireworks going or what's going on. And I remember thinking, so much of New York is engaged in this moment, which is such a historic moment, but I'm not. And I remember saying to myself, that's okay, Marilyn, because the most important thing is that you graduate and that you get a job. And if it means that you had no snippet of memory of this big moment with the Statue of Liberty, that's okay, as long as you get to your goal. And so, so I really was like, I trained myself to be like, okay, so I'm missing this, but I'm not really missing that, because once I get to my goal, then I'll have my moments. And it's true, once you're self-sufficient and, you've got a good income coming in, and you're able to buy your own house, and you're able to pay for your own vacation, and you're able to buy your own vehicle and all of these things, then you're able to enjoy life. And to me, it more than makes up for whatever it was that I missed out in my childhood, because I wasn't missing out in my childhood. I was really expending that time differently in order to reach my goals.
Judge Zayas, speaking to a teenager today, most of them are very focused on what's coming down on social media channels. And part of the influence we as parents, and especially as immigrant parents, we're saying is that our kids are getting influenced by these influences who have this different kind of an experience, and it makes it very difficult to parent kids today. If you're, as a community advocate, because I know you've done a lot of community work, how are you speaking to parents when you're out doing community advocacy so that they can actively participate in one community work, but at the same time really take a deep dive in focusing on how to raise their children so that they can be great contributors in society today?
I love that you bring in this community topic again, because at least growing up with my mom and her friends, and most of her circle of friends were people who had immigrated from Puerto Rico, or who had migrated from Puerto Rico, had immigrated from the Dominican Republic, or immigrated from Cuba. So that was the circle that she was around, because it was the Spanish-speaking circle. But nonetheless, most of them were involved in some way or another in community. Some of them was through their church, or some of them was through the school, and some of it was both, right? And it's a great example for a parent to have for their children. Social media, as you're bringing up, is a component that I didn't have growing up. But when you ask that question, I'm going to tell you what came to mind for me.
Okay.
For me personally, the thing that's troubling about social media is that it creates an illusion that's not realistic about life.
Yes.
Just like it creates an illusion that's not realistic about body image.
Yes.
Creates an illusion that's not realistic about lifestyle. Like if you want to have beautiful, wonderful things, you have to earn them. They don't just fall in your lap. You have to earn them, and you have to put in the hard work. And if you put in the hard work, at some point in your life, you're going to earn them. You may not earn them when you're 10 years old or 15 years old. You may earn them when you're in your 20s, but you have to earn them. And I think social media may kind of like create an unbalance. And that's where I think it's really important on parents and mentors and teachers and everyone that gets involved with children to provide a realistic story to that child. So like for me, if there's any child that listens to this podcast, I don't want them to think that Judge Marilyn Zayas is special, that God anointed her with some special, some greatness and specialness, and that's why she's at the Court of Appeals in Ohio. I want them to rather to say, okay, I am just like Judge Marilyn Zayas. And whatever it is that I want to do, God has already given me what I need to do that. Now I have to put in the rest of it. It's on to me to put in the rest of it. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's going to be simple. I'm not saying it's always going to go in your favor. I'm not saying that there's not going to be obstacles. I'm actually saying that all of those things are going to happen. And when those things happen, there's nothing wrong with you. That's just life.
Speak to persistence and duration of time when it comes to achieving the most important things in life. And let me explain my question. After graduating school or while in high school, most people do not understand what it takes, the amount of work it takes to build a career. Others do not understand once you build a career and you go into your career, the amount of time it takes to actually develop that path and to grow to be able to be considered successful at a certain stage. And so let's speak to the discipline it takes to build that and the amount of work it takes and why persistence would be important.
Yeah, like for example, when I was an attorney, I first worked for a big firm, and that was a great job for me because it was very intuitive. I was an intellectual property litigator, um, and it was a big firm, so it was considered to be a very difficult job. I have to say, for me, it wasn't. I did very well. I excelled. I was very favored. I was a very favored associate at the firm. Uh, the managing partner took me under the wing, and this was the biggest firm in the state of Colorado. And then what
Mm,
happened was, my husband's relocation didn't work out, and that brought me back to Ohio, which seems like adversity, right? But it
yes.
was the best thing that ever happened to me because, but for that, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you. So it wound up being exactly what I needed, was coming back to what had been my adopted hometown. Because at that point, I had been in Ohio. Gosh, I think I had been in Ohio about 9, 10 years before
Right.
I ventured out to Colorado. So then I come back, um, and I took a position that I thought would be temporary until I got back to the big firm, to the big prestigious firm where you get a great salary and benefits, and everyone is so impressed because you work for this big prestigious law firm.
Yeah.
No, I wound up in the county public defender's office, and I wind up there more long term than I expected. I thought I would be there 3 6 months. I'm there for a few years, for a couple years.
Right.
Best thing that ever happened to me again, because it brought me to why I went to law school, to be standing next to people in their most difficult times, to give voice to people that that not all of us really necessarily like all the time.
Mm,
And it really built my skills. Um and and I got to see some things that I really appreciated from judges, and I got to see some things that I didn't appreciate from judges. I really appreciated judges that were very respectful of the law, the Constitution, of the process, of courts, of people that come into courts. And that sometimes the law doesn't go your way. It doesn't mean that people are going to get the outcome that they would want to get, right? And then there
yes.
were judges that I experienced that I felt that they had prejudged and predetermined and had an outcome that they just wanted to get to. And perhaps were even at times willing to kind of bend the law to get to that outcome. And that formed for me a very clear understanding of what the responsibility of a judge is. That really helped me when I got elected. But then I
Mhm.
wound up hanging up my own shingle and building a federal practice. And when you do that, you pretty much work Monday through Sunday, let me tell you. Uh, I used to come home during the week, usually about 8 p.m.
Right.
Saturdays, I would go in the office and do more work. Sundays, I would do work from home, squeezing family time here and there. And you do that. And I wound up building a practice without advertising. It was all word of mouth. And so I built up a robust practice just by being a really excellent attorney, being a very honest attorney. So if under the law this just wasn't viable, there was no case to be had, I would tell clients that. I wouldn't take their money and then later say, "Oh, well, here's the outcome. Sorry, it just didn't go our way." I would tell them up
Mhm.
front, like, "Don't do anything. There's nothing you can do. There's
Yeah.
just nothing. It
Right.
doesn't exist under the law. It's an impossibility." If it was a difficult case, I would tell clients that, like, these are all of the things that we would have to overcome to get to your outcome. This is going to be a
Yes.
really challenging situation, and I would tell them, "Go home and pray about it. Do not pay me to do anything until you pray about it. And when you wake up in the morning, you'll know whether you should move forward with your case or not." Um, so I had very clear understanding of who I was, but boy, the hard work. And I think it's very important to whatever your responsibility is in life, whether you're a cook, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a social worker, no matter what it is that you do in life, whether you have a podcast, no matter what you do in life, integrity is really important, because at the end of
Totally.
the day, your reputation is really all that you have. And it's the one thing that you yourself can taint by your own actions. So integrity is
Yes.
really all that we have, and it's all that we have, and it's all that we should be protecting, and it's all that we're going to take with from this life onto whatever it is you believe happens after this life. It's what we're going to be taking with us. And I think it's really, really important. So I think talking about integrity with young people is incredibly important, but also being real with young people, and not pretending that yes, hard work is part of it, but Martin, I don't know if you have this experience. I say that when you keep on path, God, in the weirdest, most mysterious ways, puts in your path the person you need in the most unexpected. You're laughing because it's true. And this
It
is
is
could be
true.
a complete stranger. It could be someone that doesn't look like you, someone that doesn't sound like you, someone that doesn't come from your community. God will put in your path what you need at that moment if you stay on path. It's the weirdest thing that believing in yourself and staying on path, you will get what you need when you need it, in the most weird, miraculous, whatever you want to say way.
Yes.
And so I do believe in karma. I think that, you do good, you're going to get good. And you're going to get that moment of that person when you least expect it. And then at some point in life, it's time for you to really acknowledge and be grateful and to really give back. It's time to now reach back, but young people aren't there yet. They need to build themselves, and they need to really, they really need to not lose their hope, and they need to develop their confidence so that they can believe in themselves, because there are times that we all falter. What I'm saying is, and I don't mean falter because we do bad things, I mean falter because we lose confidence.
Yes.
There are times that we start to feel like we lose our bearings, and it happens to me. It happened to me as recently as a few years ago, even as a judge. It happened to me personally. And I had to really reach into going back to my story and acknowledging my story and acknowledging that the adversities that I have had are really the source of my strength. And that's how I build back up my confidence, was realizing the adversities that I was dealing with at that point, and all the adversities that I've handled in the past have been the source of my strength. And it really, I'm at such a different point now in life, because I'm at a point right now that it's like, I'm really grateful for everything I've gone through. I want to write thank you notes to people that they would be shocked if they got that thank you note, because I wouldn't be here but for those moments.
Yes, I have learned in life that the most important gift you can ever give anybody is gratitude, right? Speaking about giving gratitude, as a judge, have you ever found yourself at a place where the overwhelming evidence against the accused is available, but in your heart of hearts, you have this feeling that you cannot push away that tells you this person may not be guilty?
Well, first of all, I'm not a trial judge, I'm an appellate judge.
Okay.
So let me explain that. So, like in Ohio, I think there's over 700 elected trial judges that are making decisions such as that, such as guilty or
Hmm.
not guilty, rendering the
Right.
sentences, making decisions on who's going to get custody of a child or the division of property in a divorce, who's responsible for a car accident, multi-million dollar contract issues of determining how to read that contract, so all of these cases, adoption cases, all of these cases go to trial judges. In Ohio, there's only 69 appellate judges, and we're all elected. And that's statewide, there's 69. So I'm only one of 69 judges. So that's why it's a real big deal to be at this level, because it's a very high level. So we're just below the Supreme Court. We are reviewing cases that already took place. We are reviewing the transcript, the evidence, the testimony, everything that took place. We're looking at the law. And when somebody appeals the case, the person who's appealing the case, they lost. So it didn't go their way, and they're appealing it. But in that appeal, it's not that we don't get to retry the case. We get to see whether there was an error that took place, whether something went wrong, and it went wrong. It passed such the threshold. We call it reversible error. And most of the times that we find reversible error, it means the person's entitled to a new trial. Most of the times, that's what the outcome is. And there's actually 3 judges at the appellate tribunal that review a case. So it's not even one judge; it's always 3 judges, and that's both in the federal system and the state system. So federal system, all appellate tribunals, which are called circuit courts, have 3 judges. The state system, I believe that all or most state systems are also 3 judges. So I'm going to rephrase your question. Certainly I have had cases where the law commands a certain outcome, and that's what the legislature passed, and that's what the law says must be done. But it seems quite unfair,
Yes.
But as a judge, it's really important that I still have to apply that law, because I'm not the legislature. I don't get to rewrite the law, right?
Yes.
I have to apply that law, I feel like, look, if I were to say, well, I'm going to, pretend it doesn't say that and do something different, then the same thing that has happened to communities of color, I'm sanctioning that. Many times communities of colors feel like, hey, we get harsher sentences, or things, we get treated differently, right? We want to be treated the same. So if I ignore what the law commands for me to do, then I'm saying that it's okay for those things to happen as well.
Yeah.
And it's really, and what this leads us to, honestly, Martin, is the power of the vote. When people say, well, my vote doesn't matter, well, cumulatively, it does matter, because you're deciding who's passing those laws. For example, you're deciding, that judge that you're going to hire, sometimes it's the trial judge, right? You're deciding who that person is and what it is that they consider to be significant in rendering the sentence, or how they see the facts of the case. So I'll give you an example that a trial judge one time used. So he said, and I think this is it kind of brings the point home. He said, so the trial judges, you have people that show up late for their proceedings. And when they show up late, you can order a warrant. It's called a capious warrant, because they didn't show up on time, right? So he said, well, sometimes I watch some judges, and you have someone who has a white collar job, works in corporate America, and they show up late, and the trial court says, okay, let's put this case at the end of the docket, and let's give them time to show up for their case. Okay? Like the attorney says, hey, my client, they're working, they're on whatever. Oh yeah, we're going to, right? And then you have a poor person who comes, who has a public defender, and they said, oh, my client is, running late on the way. And the judge says, well, they were supposed to be here at 8:30, capious. Well, some trial judges might say, well, tell me about your client. Well, she's a mother, and she had to drop off her kids at the bus stop and then take the public bus in order to come to court, and that's why she's late. So you see how can totally change the outcome of that situation.
Yeah.
Depending on who the judge is and how they're going, what they're going to ask and how they're going to see things. And so
As a judge, how do you remove yourself from such situations?
what do you mean, how do I remove myself from such situations?
From the biases that our culture has value. Like, how do you remove yourself from a bias of a person who's a white collar job versus a person who shows up and cannot even speak the English language?
I think one of the advantages that I have is that I have experience on the whole gamut. So I've had a white collar job, and my mom was a factory worker, and you know what I mean? I have the whole gamut. I have a brother who's a police officer. His whole career was a police officer. He was actually hit by a drunk driver and was almost killed. He also responded to 9/11 to help with the survivor search. He has 9/11 lung disease. I have two brothers that are educators, that are teachers. So I have like such a breadth of personal experience and experience through my family, that it really has, I really do live the reality that everyone has value, from the richest person to the poorest person, from the most educated to the least educated, from, whatever it is. But I also, who I am as a judge and as a person is so rooted to my childhood experience of being treated differently, of being treated as a child that not much was expected of. That I was supposed to be a statistic. I was supposed to be a pregnant teenage mom who's a dropout. I was supposed to have a drug or alcohol dependency. My brothers were supposed to be the same. And all that I really wanted was equal opportunity and equal treatment. And in my office, in my court office, I have a picture of myself when I'm 7 years old. And I keep that with me all the time. And the reason I have that with me is that's the reminder of that little girl that she just wanted equal opportunity. She wanted the same as everyone else. And it's there to remind me, Marilyn, this is what your job is every day. Every day, the law is really the equalizer, because even when we don't like the law, it's really intended to be applied the same. And so I keep that as a visual reminder of my job. And I also have what's called the Judicial. It's like the code it's called like the Judicial Code. And it's like the oath that we take of what it is that we promise to do as judges. I have that framed, and it was given to me by a judge that retired from my court. And I asked her, can you give me one thing before you retire that I can keep? And that's what she gave me. And I put it in a little wall section that's on the doorway. So every day when I exit my office to go to court, that is right there. That is telling me exactly what my responsibility is as a judge.
I'm glad you pivoted to that. So can you talk about the support systems or mentors that have been so instrumental in the 7-year-old who lived in Harlem to becoming the judge and successful parent you are today?
I think that my biggest mentor as a child was my mom. And I didn't realize it at the time, and it's because she led by example. And she made it very clear what her expectations were, education. And, so I told you about, the only inheritance I have is for you is education. Her other saying that she would say to us all the time is, don't ever have $1 in your pocket that you didn't earn. And she would say, I'm personally not interested in $1 that isn't mine to begin with. Right. And so she taught us you have to earn everything you have. So she gave me sort of like an ethic code to live by, right? And then I would say from there it would be my teachers. I had some teachers that I really reached to every once in a while, and they become a source of strength for me. One of those teachers is my 4th grade teacher. And the reason she's a source of strength for me is because She or she was teaching an inner city school class. This class actually was probably about half of the class were first generation Americans of all different backgrounds. I had a lot of kids in my class that were Greek. They were first generation Americans. Their parents had immigrated from Greece. So she had this whole school. I had a one child that was from Nigeria. He was a first generation American. He was in my class. And so we were in an accelerated class, and we all kind of moved together from first grade to sixth grade. And my fourth grade teacher loved every one of us and loved us equally. She looked at us with such love and caring and but she really believed in us. She knew that all of us had the potential to do wonderful things in life. And from the minute we walked into the classroom to the minute we left, we all got that equal treatment from her. And I reached back to her because she's such a model of the way we should treat all children and the way we should treat everybody, because of the way that, she exemplified that. And then when I was an attorney, I had some judges who singled me out and took me under their wings. And it was one of those judges who started 3 years before I ran saying to me, Marilyn, you would be an excellent judge. I want you to run to be a judge. And Martin, I used to tell that judge who would vote for me. She saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I would say, who would vote for me, Judge? Who would vote for me? And this went on for 3 years, where she kept saying, you would be an excellent judge. I want you to run for judge. And she kept setting up meetings for me because she wanted me to do this. And I kept saying, who would vote for me? Until one day, I was able to flip that switch in my head. And now I'm very grateful for the people that are, because the people that are supportive of me, what they do is they really acknowledge like all the hard work that I do. And they're always whispering in my ear of like, make sure you take a break, make sure you go on vacation. They're always like trying to protect me from burning out. And so they're kind of mentors, but in a different way now.
Yes.
And now I just really enjoy the opportunity to work with young people. So I have several mentees that most of them are actually, they have finished their studies. So they started off as recent law school graduates or recent undergraduate graduates, and many of them are still in my life. I have a new mentee that started with me in the fall of last year, and he finished his undergraduate, and he is now going, so he was interested in going to law school. He's decided to go to law school. He's applying. He's waiting now for his responses. And so and I've also created a lot of student programming. So my last program that I created was created last fall, and we're in the middle of it right now. It's called Girls in Law. It's a partnership with the Cincinnati Public Schools, and it enrolls seniors and juniors throughout the Cincinnati Public School to engage in a multi-week program that they learn a lot about the court system. And they also get to meet attorneys, people that are in law enforcement, judges, get to hear about their personal stories, so that they can also believe and be inspired, and that they can also build a network. So we're in the middle of that right now. All the girls that are participating in that program in the month of March, what they're doing is they're shadowing judges. So there's several judges that have enrolled themselves and allowed themselves to be shadowed, and the girls had a menu of judges to choose from, and they're going through their shadowing experience in March.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, what does campaigning to become a judge? What does that look like?
A lot of hard work. I mean, for me, it was just important for me to meet as many people as I could and to share with them who I am as a person,
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that who you are as a person is ultimately who you bring as a judge and how you do your judicial function. Fortunately, this is my 8th year. I have a very strong judicial reputation. Uh, Attorneys, they are very supportive and very happy with the work that I've done. And when I say attorneys, a lot of people say to me, so are you supported by prosecutors or by defense attorneys? And my answer is both. I have support from both. And they both say the same thing. Like, Marilyn is reliable. Marilyn is predictable. And the prediction of Marilyn is she's going to follow the law. That's how we predict Marilyn. Means that sometimes we're going to lose, sometimes we're going to win, because she's going to follow the law. The other reputation that I have is being a judge that's highly intelligent. And being a judge that really is very thoughtful about our Constitution. Because the Court of Appeals, constitutional challenges do come to the Court of Appeals. So sometimes there's legislation that has been passed, and the constitutionality of that legislation gets challenged in the judiciary, and it comes to the Court of Appeals before it gets to the Supreme Court. And sometimes it never gets to the Supreme Court. It's only the constitutionality is determined by the Court of Appeals. So what we're doing is really, really important. But it also is community changing and life changing work, because we really are the gatekeepers of the security and the safety of the community, and the gatekeepers of the Constitution as well, and our constitutional rights.
Yes. Judge Zayas, earlier when we were talking about the support team that you have around you, you mentioned about people who are whispering in your ear now, asking you, hey, are you taking some time off? Are you taking vacation? Because they're concerned about your success, and they're concerned about you doing good work. Given the stress associated with legal professions and the additional pressures of our campaign life, what importance do you place on mental health, and how do you manage your well-being, including family's well-being?
Well, so as a judge, I have gotten even more engaged in exercising, walking, and yoga than ever in my life. So I've gotten really good at slivering time out to do that. Because that's not like a long-term commitment, like you can do that. And that's how I've been able to sort of like manage my stress, keep my mind clear, and in some ways have the best thought process as well, to be able to really be able to think very clearly.
Yes.
So that's my biggest component for mental health. I've not been a great example on doing vacations. I've been an epic failure in that area, because I don't have a political background, and I even have a peculiar name with a letter that you never even see on the ballot. Like, have you ever seen the letter Z on the ballot when you go vote? Most likely not, right? So I really have, I've worked really, really hard on the one thing that I can control, which is my judicial reputation, and doing an excellent job. And I don't see my job as a 9-to-5 job. My job is whatever it takes. If I'm working Saturdays and Sundays, I'm working Saturdays and Sundays. If I'm not on vacation, I'm on vacation.
That's very interesting you say that, because most people today say, no, I just want to work 40 hours and I'm good. 40 hours is enough. And I'm just curious, where does the conviction that I can work on a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday throughout the week, take a little rest, and then get back to doing it again and again and again? How is that healthy? And if it is, how does it befit your family dynamic? And are you married to work and not married?
I think that people would say Marilyn is probably more married to work, but I will say this, like, when you have passion for something, it doesn't always feel like
Yes.
work. So I'll say
Yes.
that. It isn't like,
Okay.
I don't think that my job is arduous. All
Mm.
right.
Yes.
I will say this, that I also, I'm also realistic. So what I did last year is I sold my home. and I am now living in an apartment, in a rental. And
Okay.
that was a purposeful choice so that I no longer have the responsibilities of maintaining a home and maintaining a garden and all the things that come with a home. And I can just pay my rent and be done.
Yeah.
Um, and I've also been far more purposeful in spending time with my adult children. Um, so they're kind of the ones that kind of are more busy than I am in some ways. But we allot time where, and usually it's individualized. So like one of my daughters, she loves to watch TV with me. And sometimes we will sit down and watch like a marathon session of like, a whole series, the first episode to the last episode. We'll order food, and we spend that time together. Coming up, I'm going to be going to a concert with one of my other daughters. So, I'm very purposeful of any opportunity that I have to spend time with my children.
Mhm.
I will pretty much always say yes to that, and then figure out how to get the rest of it done. As long as it's not any, there's some exceptions to that, obviously, right? Um,
Yes.
and then vacationing. I last year at the end of the year, because we stopped hearing cases at the end of November. um, I spend the end of the year, I went and spent some time with my mom. So last year I was also very purposeful. My mom is getting older, she's got different issues that are coming up. So I went several times to New York and spent an extended time with my mom, like over a week. So a
Yes.
lot of my vacation was really spending time with my mom, making sure that she was taken care of. But at the end of the year, I actually took a real vacation, and went on a 2-week cruise, and was able to see different parts of Europe that I had not seen. Um, and those people that are whispering my ear, they were so, I think they were happier than I was. They were like, finally, finally, Judge, this is what we've been telling you to do. And
Yes.
my answer to that is, well, that's partially why I sold my house, because now that time that the house was taking up, I can now allot, to being able to, vacation and to be even more open to spending time with my kids. So that's how I personally handled it.
From what I am understanding, you've become very intentional about how you're managing your resources and, of course, your resourcefulness.
Absolutely.
When you spending time with your family or when you're spending time with yourself, what are those conversations like, especially if you're starting to think, what is my impact in the world going to be like?
With my kids, my goal is to make it all about them. So whatever they want to talk about is what we want to talk is what we talk about. Whatever they want to do is what I want to do. That's what I'm interested in doing, and it's going to be fun because that's what they want to do.
Yes.
Um, it doesn't matter what it is. It's always going to be fun for me. For myself, I'm very purposeful in having moments where I'm not thinking about anything, so that I can
Mhm.
empty everything out so that I can then fill it up. Um, but I'm also very purposeful of having moments where I have conversations with myself of outside of my function as a judge. What are you doing? Are you happy with what you're doing? What can you do more of? What's next? And that's partially what led me to my most recent program, for example. Um,
Mhm.
so a lot of times when I have those conversations, I come up with an action plan. Um, and like in the past, one of my action plans is I decided to reach back to my law school and to talk to some of the student groups and find out how they were doing and what their needs are. And based on that conversation, there was actually programs that I collaborated with law students to put together to fill those needs that they had articulated that they wanted to have. Um, and that was born out of a moment of me thinking, saying, what are you doing? What can you be doing? What haven't you done? You know what, Marilyn, you should reach back and talk to the law students that are in your alma mater and see how they're doing. Just see what their needs are.
Judge says there's something you just said that's near and dear to my heart, and I don't want anybody to miss it. So we're gonna go back there, and that's thinking time. All right. You said you find time to empty everything out and fill it up. What is that?
Well, that's where the exercise, the yoga, the walks, I call it watching mindless television. And
Okay.
what I mean by watching mindless television, like nothing that's going to be academic engaging that I have to think or anything. Something that's
Yes.
just going to make me laugh, something that just unfolds in front of me. It doesn't have to be meaningful. It doesn't have to be deep. Um, so I watch mindless television. Um, People sometimes want to buy me a book to read, and I actually, because I read so much in my profession, I don't read very much outside of that. I'll read things that's relevant, and like sometimes I'll read things that I'm really interested in. Like I like to read a lot about the U.S. Constitution and about the inception of the U.S. Constitution and things like that are more kind of academic, right? But when
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to empty it out, I will look at books or magazines that have what I call pretty pictures. And I
Hmm.
just sit there and look at the pretty pictures and just decompress looking at pretty pictures, So there's no thinking, there's no reading. I don't even read the captions. I'm just looking at pretty pictures of things that make me happy. Um, and there's things that make us happy. For some people it might be animals, and whatever it is, right? For me,
Yes, yes.
it's like pretty landscapes, and I love mid-century anything, so mid-century houses and natural scenes and things like that. And I just look at pictures and just no thinking, just totally emptying out.
Judge Zayas, if you are not a judge, what would you be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Um, in different phases of my life, I would have answered that differently. I think in this phase of my life, I would say probably a teacher.
Yes.
I would say that I would be a teacher.
Okay.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a ballerina. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a ballerina. I loved ballet. I still love ballet, but I wanted
Yes.
to be a ballerina. And then
Uh, 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 oh my
wanted to be
word.
a police officer, and that was
Your
before.
brothers did that for you.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? So I wanted to be a police officer for many years, and that was
Mhm.
before I wanted to be an engineer.
Excellent, excellent. Jazeers, we are at the top of the hour, and as always, I wanted to be very respectful of your time. Thank you so much for making the time for us. If our listeners wanted to reach out to you for anything, where can they find you?
So my email address is my name followed by @gmail.com. So it's Judge, Judge, Marilyn, Marilyn, Zayas, Zayas @gmail.com.
Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Marilyn Zayas. We appreciate your time, Judge. Bye bye.